Y'all know what it is.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. This week we have very special guest, CEO, entrepreneur, and top business growth specialist, Ryan Niddel. Ryan is a leading authority on growing the revenue of companies by improving their EBITDA through increased operational efficiency, lean manufacturing principles, and more, based on years of real-life experience. He has worked on the acquisition or exit of more than a dozen companies, seeing them surpass collective sales of more than $240 million. And through his efforts, he has coached his clients through massive boosts in revenue, which have added nearly $1 billion to their collective valuations. In addition to his big business reputation, one unique aspect of Ryan's practice is the work he does for his popular podcast, 15 Minutes to Freedom. On the show, he explores topics that are certainly becoming more popular in business, but are still not totally mainstream, despite their importance to business leaders as humans. His conversations surround the importance of physical and mental well-being, goal setting, and lessons learned from everyday life that not only pertain to becoming better business leaders, but also better people. Joining us today for an exciting conversation about preparing our businesses for sales and navigating the mergers and acquisitions process, taking control of the entrepreneur's mindset to find true satisfaction in our work, how to become a great business leader to even greater teams, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Ryan Niddel. Hey, Ryan, how are you?
And I'm great, Ryan. How about yourself?
Absolutely. Doing really well. Thank you. And I really appreciate you making the time to do this show. It's kind of a funny story. Basically, we had, I've got a family that came into town today. And one of the things that I had done to prepare was sort of clear the slate on today so that I had the opportunity to visit with parents and stuff. And when I saw that you were on the list, and I had done some early research when whoever it was that was representing you reached out to us, I did some early research, and man, I just got so jacked to have a conversation with you. I did some, early listening back then, a month ago or whenever we booked to do a little deep dive on you and listen to some of your content. And I really like the way you carry yourself. I think the information you've got is great. So I'm just thrilled to death to have you here. And you were the one thing I kept on the calendar today. So I appreciate you doing it.
Man, I'm flattered as you're listening. You can't see that my cheeks are red with these accolades, but I appreciate it and look forward to sharing time with you, Ryan.
Absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to it. So I guess let's just start from the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about your early days, how you got started sort of on your entrepreneurial journey. And I guess, were you always entrepreneurial?
So I wasn't always entrepreneurial. I didn't even know what the term entrepreneur meant, right? I grew up in, I'll say, middle America. If you've seen the movie Shawshank Redemption at all, ever, that movie was shot in my hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. The prison's still there. It's still fully, functional as a tourist attraction. But it was just, parents were just middle America, average income, average belief system. And as I was growing up in that time in life, Tommy Hilfiger cologne was a big driver for popularity. And oddly enough, so were Michael Jordan tennis shoes, back then. And yeah, I shared those with my parents. Like, this is what all the cool kids have, and I want what the cool kids have because I really want to fit in. And they looked and said, under no circumstances will we ever buy you either one of those things. At $100+ tennis shoes and $50 to $70 cologne just were completely out of the scope of understanding of reality. I said, but if you want to go out and earn money to have it yourself, feel free to. And so we had an all steel lawnmower that I spray painted bright blue. And I literally went door to door in our little neighborhood. I think we had 120 houses in our neighborhood, and went door to door just ringing doorbells on people whose lawns looked a little longer in length than their neighbors, and started to build a little, I'll call it, lawn mowing business. I think I had, don't hold me to it, somewhere between 10 and 20 different lawns that I was mowing on a weekly basis, right? Just flat fee, $10 a lawn. I was providing the lawnmower and the gas. And all of a sudden, I started to understand now in hindsight that the power of just getting a little uncomfortable, right? I certainly, at 10 years old, it was necessity that drove it, or the perception of necessity, right? I wanted something that I didn't know that my parents weren't willing to give me. And just going out there and knocking on doors and, really being vulnerable, just hey, I'm here. I couldn't help but notice your lawn's a little longer than your neighbors. I'd love to mow it for you. And if I do a good job, I'd like to, get $10 in compensation. And if I do a really great job, I'd like to be able to come back every week and just take care of it for you. And that was a whole sales pitch back then, to the best of my recollection. It's been, 27, 28 years, but I think it's pretty close.
No, I love that. Well, and it just makes me laugh too. So I have an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old, both of which who have, champagne taste and way less than like beer budgets, some kind, not even like a PBR these days. Like it would have been a good old bad beer, but now even the old bad beer is hip and cool. So like you can't even buy cheap bad beer anymore. But nonetheless, they run into this all the time, right? This concept of like, well, I need money. Mom and dad won't give it to me. How do I go get it? And so, so I love stories like this, and we've encouraged our boys to do something similar, go door to door, go ask your neighbors. But most of the time, the discomfort of doing that has been enough to dissuade them from chasing down that shoe. They'll just wait for a birthday or something. And so, anyways, it's been kind of funny, but I love to hear that sort of, motivation as a young person. And even though you didn't equate it to entrepreneurship back then, sort of those skills translated. So I think it's a really interesting thing. So, but yeah, so from mowing yards, where do we go?
Yeah. And so Ryan, as luck, divinity, or the universe unfolds for us, one of the clients that allowed me to mow their lawn actually was a small business owner. And I had no idea, right? Literally his house was right across the street from ours, kind of a diagonal. And I had no idea anything about this individual. Every house kind of looks the same in the neighborhood. And so I had mowed his lawn off and on from 10 until 14. So that, right, obviously a summer type of gig, and I'm not making money in the winter, but 14 comes around and there's a neighborhood pool where, right, all of us would walk to and all the kids in the neighborhood would congregate at. And I had walked his daughter to the pool. Daughter was, a year or two younger than I was. And he came down to the pool and he was with a good friend of his and said, hey, you've been mowing my lawn off and on for 14 years. How do you like to make some more money? Ears perk up. Absolutely. I didn't even ask what it was, right? Yes. Yes. He says, well, don't you want to know what it is? I said, I suppose it would matter. Yeah, I would like to know. He said, well, I've got an office, and he gave me the address. And he said, I've got this boat that just needs cleaned out. Just come clean up the boat and I'll pay you whatever the dollar was. Oh, sure. So, ask my parents, make sure they'll drive me down there, the whole deal back at 14, and get to this office building that had a 10,000 square foot warehouse behind it that was originally designed for a machine shop, but was empty. Just had, boat and some motorcycles, a pickup truck. And this boat was, to say it was dirty would be an understatement. And come to find out, he owned, I'll say 30 or 40 acres and had a pole barn on it. And the boat had been parked in this pole barn for 2 years. So mice and raccoons, it just, a lot of things had happened inside of this boat. And so I'm there with, rubber gloves, cleaning out all types of things from, God knows what and God knows where, and spend all day cleaning this boat, getting it literally spotless, waxing it, polishing it, the whole deal. And he comes down and is impressed enough with the work that says, hey, would you like to do more stuff like this for me? Absolutely, I would. Didn't even know what that really meant. Well, come to find out, he had 3 daughters. And I was essentially turned into, for that season of life, at least, a son he never had. And so he owned a manufacturing representative business, didn't even know what that was at that point, and had 2 offices, one in Mansfield, Ohio, and one just south of Detroit. And his company represented businesses that had die-cast aluminum and magnesium parts for, the big 3, the automotive industry, essentially. And from 14 until 21, I worked for him in different capacities, everything from, taking care of the 40-acre property on a Kubota tractor with a big pool behind, all the way into, being his personal chauffeur at times, as he had work to do. And I would drive him from Mansfield to Michigan as he did work on the phone, and almost anything in between. And man, the lessons that I can look back now and see that he was teaching me that I didn't value, right? For me, it was, I have a job, I have someone that cares about me, I'm around all this cool stuff. So I started to see a different caliber of life. I feel like as I was working for him, he really hit an inflection point. I'm a car guy, so I equate things to cars as kind of a potential, gauge for what success could look like, especially in the non-internet entrepreneur days, right? I also call it the more brick and mortar wealth accumulation businesses. When I started for him, he had, a Cadillac sedan DeVille. That was his daily driver, right? Certainly a nice car, but right, decent, I'll say, in today's standards. And as I worked for him, right, we get into, BMW 7 Series and new Escalades and new Corvettes, and all these things are massively expanding. And he's literally giving me breadcrumbs that I couldn't see were right in front of me at that point. He handed me Jack Welch's book straight from the gut. It had just come out. He said, "You got to read this. It's really something impactful." That book sat on my shelf, Ryan, from the day he gave it to me until about 6 years ago, and I had never opened it. He gave me, Who Moved My Cheese? He gave me Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He gave me all these things. It was encouraging me to read Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, these things that were very prevalent for him in that season. And he's giving to me and encouraging me to read it. And I just shunned it, right? It just wasn't important then. And so it's really fascinating to now, I'll say, come more full circle and be in a point and position in my life to, I'm currently looking for that young man or woman that I can take under my wing that wants to, earn some extra money and pour into those lessons, which is part of, to me, what opportunities like our conversation are, and just general life. I think it is our responsibility as individuals that are business owners that might have been through some things to turn around and hand those lessons to people in a way that hopefully they don't have to, trip over their feet, maybe the way that I have. And he was doing that. I wasn't receptive or didn't realize what he was doing. It really makes me almost feel foolish in this moment to say it out loud, that here's this man that's amassing wealth, that has done incredibly well for himself, that had a hugely generous heart. And I'm looking at it just in the material possession way of all the cool things he's doing and all the cool things I can be a part of, and not realizing that he was literally trying to alter the way that I was thinking. And it took a full, really 10 or 11 years post the time that him and I parted ways for that to come about, for it just to finally click.
So I currently am on the road right now doing weddings and events, and I've been in this industry for 25, 26 years now. And the wedding planner that I work with pretty regularly at this point has a 14-year-old son. And when I first started doing this, I was 14 years old. It was 1996. My first gig was a church dance, and I was his age. And when I found out he was 14, he was old enough to kind of start coming in and doing stuff. I put him to work this summer as a helper to help me unload and set things up, and seeing him kind of like start to figure things out and get excited for making money and wanting to come out and be, somewhat of a, instead of waiting for his allowance, he can actually come out and start making money. It's really kind of cool to see that spark ignite in a young kid. And I have always tried to, whenever I'm with my family, my cousins or whatever, I want to have a positive mindset with them to where they can actually realize that they can do anything they want. And if they have those kind of role models and things in their lives, I think at an early age, if they can realize that they can succeed and do anything, if they can take that and shape the rest of their lives with that mindset, it's just sky's the limit. And you're probably the perfect example of that. Can you maybe tell us about the first project that you did, that you took on, that wasn't really affiliated with him, that was kind of like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get my feet wet and try this on my own? And how did that go? And what lessons did you learn from that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think to add a little context to this, throughout the evolution of me working for him, I couldn't help but starting to date the girl that is his daughter when I walk to the pool.
I see how it is.
Yeah, we get to this point in life, and her and I part ways. And I certainly I struggled with conflict, and telling the truth was something that I struggled with from, late teens all the way to about 30, with just that dealing with whatever is going to come and facing it head on. And so her and I break up, and I wasn't truthful about the fact of eventually finding another woman to date. And she found out about that, and right, he had to choose and make sense, choose her over the relationship him and I had built. So that eventually led into, of all things, I got into the car business. Right, I wrapped up with college engineering, mechanical engineering, and got into the illustrious world of automotive sales. And that was the first entry point into the professional world. And little dealership in Mansfield, Ohio. And it was oddly enough, that the dealer principal was ready to shut off our website. He goes, this is just nuts. It's not going to work. I'm done spending money on a website, an auto trader. I'm going to pull the plug. And I said, look, as I look around, the average age of an employee there had to be 55, and I'm 21, 22. And I said, look, I don't want to be held responsible for it, but can I play around with this for 30 or 45 days and see if there's anything there? Would you mind investing for one more month? He said, why not at that point? Well, I was able to figure out the internet, which certainly wasn't back then figuring much out. It was just making sure that vehicles had proper descriptions and that the phone number actually had somebody pick it up when it rang. Like, I wasn't reinventing the wheel at all, just some really common sense things. And I ended up turning that into its own department, the internet sales department for this dealership. So pretty quickly was selling 20, 30, I don't know, somewhere in there, number of cars, and had a staff to help support me. And then jumped into running part of the dealership, the Ford Lincoln Mercury side, as well as the internet side. And so it was exciting, but at the same point, sitting down with that dealer principal, his son started to come into the dealership and was eventually going to take over as the potential dealer principal. And he said, look, you've kind of already hit the ceiling for what you're going to achieve here. Like there's not a whole lot more than you're going to get to. And so just want to, shoot you straight. I value what you've done so far, but you're at where you're going to be at. And so, certainly valuing that, move from Mansfield, Ohio down to Columbus, Ohio, and interviewed, actually a quick funny story. I interviewed at a dealership called Midwestern Auto Group. Sat in front of this gentleman. It's a Highline store that has every European brand under the sun, all under one roof, all new cars. Sit in front of this guy and he said, look, you're nice enough, but you will absolutely never, ever, ever sell Highline cars. Don't bother coming here. You don't have what it takes. You should absolutely leave. Why leave?
Okay.
I'm pretty dejected. I'm like, this guy he was direct. I'm like, gosh, but this guy's ran this dealership for 10 years. He's got to know what he's saying. So I'm leaving with my tail between my legs. Ended up meeting a Mercedes-Benz dealership down there, and they offered me a job. I said, it's not exactly what I want to do, but Mercedes-Benz is no slouch. I'll come work there. It's a new opportunity. I just pressed the fast forward button. I ended up, taking over as general sales manager of the Mercedes store inside of 12 months. Then get courted by the dealer principal of the dealership that told me I could never sell. Come over, and
Nice.
I end up occupying the office of the man that told me I would never sell cars in Columbus, Ohio, in the Highline world, as the general sales manager of that store. And so I like those challenges. Right? I'm wired in such a way when people tell me I can't do things, there's this muscle that's been fortified inside of me that's the go switch. That's the, okay, even if they never know that I proved them wrong, it's this thing inside of me like, can I really do this? How can I do this? And it just shifts into this, I'll call it attack mode of, I can figure this out. If I dedicate my energy and resource, I'm going to figure it out. But even then, guys, I have to say, I don't look at that as an entrepreneurial journey. I was an employee, right? I was a W-2 employee. I was punching the clock and was eventually brought on to a startup web hosting company out of Akron, Ohio. I sold a gentleman a car and put on a track day, and one thing leads to another, and he offers me a job, or through his best friend. I didn't know what web hosting was. I didn't know what digital marketing was. I didn't know what affiliates were. Didn't know anything. And nobody could tell me, right? That I'm sitting there interviewing for this job. And I said, well, tell me what I'm going to have to do. I said, well, look, you'll eventually find these people that we call affiliates. You'll hop on a plane. You'll find the most expensive restaurant in the town. You'll take them out to there. Then you'll find the nicest club or whatever else they're into. And you'll take them to that place and you'll fly home. This is a job? Like, people, you're going to pay me to do this? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I come on board. We've got about 10,000 clients. It takes 2 months or so, and figure out that there are opportunities, right? Business opportunities, back then is what they were called, of individuals teaching people how to make money online. But back then it was before the web builders were out. There weren't the Wix and Weebly and some of the easy website builders that exist now, Shopify, things like that. So we created an automatic process to build a website for someone as long as they paid for web hosting through us. And that had us grow from 10,000 clients to almost 600,000 clients inside of 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And it came from me finding the series of affiliates. And gosh, it took 4.5 months after that before the founder said, okay, we're now on a path for about 50 million in revenue. Life is really good at this point. Why don't you take over as president and CEO? Why don't we make you an equity partner? And I'm 27, and I now think I am King Kong. You can't tell me anything. But I'm a really humble guy now. But at that moment in time, it might as well have been I should have carried a Sawzall with me to cut open new door frames, because my ego and head wouldn't have fit through a regular door frame. It was just, I just had to know everything. And so we ended up raising capital twice for that, and then selling it off to a subsidiary of GoDaddy. And so that was the first, right, I'll say, pat on my back. I've got it all figured out. I'm 29. I've sold my first business, not solo, right? We have partners in the business and things like that. I want to make sure I stayed it the right way. And I tell you, I took my eye off the ball so significantly that the next business I started, right, I took that cash. I'm like, I'm gonna do this again. I laughingly say I have the Midas touch at that point. I might as well be the next Warren Buffett in my mind. Well, I started a high risk merchant processing company, and 18 months later, my shiny new Ford F-250 Platinum's getting repossessed. The 2 rental properties I have are in foreclosure. I've got $2,000 left to my name in total. I'm letting go of the 9 employees that I have December 22nd, and there's nothing left. To say that I'm broke, right? I've got 28,000 or so in credit card debt at that point. I don't have a vehicle because I don't have the cash to get it out of impound. And I'm sitting there saying, what the heck happened? 18 months ago or so, I'm flying private. The life is beyond good, right? Multiple cars, multiple watches, multiple homes. Like, it's just abundance wouldn't even be the proper term. Decadence, foolish decadence. But nonetheless, it was, all bets were off. You want to go to Miami for the weekend? Cool. I'm going to get the charter. We're going to go down. Let's say the Fontainebleau. I'll just rent out the top floor. We'll get all of our friends. We'll have a great time. I'll pay. We'll come home. And then I'm broke. And like selling watches and figuring out how to make rent. I just met then my girlfriend, now my wife. We move in together. And it's, man, I don't have money to pay our rent this month. Like, our rent's $2,700 and I have $2,200 to my name at that point. And I look at her like, how is this going to work itself out? And just a fascinating, like, I'll remove the word like. I learned more about myself in the next 2 years than I had learned about myself in the previous 20.
I love it. Well, let me interrupt you there, and we'll let that story sit as a cliffhanger because I want to keep going with it and see how it turns out. But I just want to point out a couple of things because I'm getting a lot of notes here, and I don't want some of these things to be left without. But one of the things that really occurs to me that's interesting about the way that you're talking about your story and the way that you talk about yourself is it seems that you're very comfortable being vulnerable, right? I mean, you're sitting here and we're having this conversation about the failures, right? And the problems. And I think that these stories are really important because I think our ego gets in the way a lot. And even if we are doing poor, we will be the last ones to say it. We won't ask for help. We won't admit that there's an issue, and we just keep trudging along, until the day that it hits us and we've got $2,200 in the bank. So I wondered, if you could just give us a quick, a sidebar here on sort of vulnerability, sort of the role you think it plays, because even all the way back to your childhood, even, in that first experience, as you described it, you were vulnerable, right? You went out and you did something that was challenging, and you were, I guess, in a situation where somebody could tell you no, or could, tell you to get off our yard, and then as you moved into working with this other gentleman and you started doing projects with him and you started working through different things, again, it was like, I'm vulnerable in the sense that I'm going to just raise my hand and I'm going to trust that you're not going to put me in a situation that's weird. Like, you're just going to, you're going to offer me something that's useful. You go on to the dealership and, and maybe there's a little discussion to be done about sort of competitiveness and things like that might've driven you to work extra hard in the dealership. But same thing, despite this person telling you this and you being vulnerable in the sense that, well, shit, maybe I'm not good for this. Maybe I'm not cut out to do this. Right. And again, so there's sort of this recurring theme where I'm seeing this vulnerability, but this willingness to work with it. Right. And I wonder, and maybe I'm making too many connections here, but I wonder too, like, I know you're like a fit guy, you're a guy that pays a lot of attention to fitness and things like that. I know that, I mean, from what you've told us, you're very competitive. And so I wonder if there isn't sort of a connection of those three elements, this vulnerability, this personal fitness, and sort of the confidence that comes from working out and exercising, and that sort of competitiveness. If sort of those three things make up the thing that allows you to be comfortable when you're uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense, Ryan. It is such an exciting moment to see somebody digest and pick apart what goes on in my brain. So I thank you for bringing it up.
The vulnerability, those diatribes don't work. So just so you know, but we nailed it this time, but they don't always work.
You certainly did. So the vulnerability to me, I can even look at vulnerability as a level of insecurity in some point. And it's a mask for the insecurity that's on in front of me. And what I mean by that is the next season of life, I end up eventually sharing a podcast, right? 15 minutes of freedom. There's some things in between there. But what it ended up being is I didn't want someone else to be able to tell my story. I didn't want somebody else, because as a child, I got picked on, right? And I think that's probably normal for at least where I grew up. It's like, that's really how men kind of bonded, right? Everybody was making fun of each other, but I never felt like I quite fit in. I was skinny. I couldn't put on muscle. I was a really late bloomer, right? Facial hair was nothing I had to worry about in high school. Like, there were just things that I didn't mature at the same rate as other guys. And so being able to own the fact of, almost like the movie 8 Mile, when Eminem raps in the battle. I don't know if you guys have seen it or not. If you have, where he just goes ahead and says everything about himself that his competitor is going to say, and it disarms him because there's nothing else left to talk about, because all of it's out there. And I have operated that way for quite some time without realizing that was even a defense mechanism, right? As we look at psychology and what goes on that side, it's a way to protect myself so other people really couldn't pick on me at the same level that I felt picked on before. And so that also then was the caveat to get into weightlifting, and really bodybuilding is what it ended up being. And not to be the jacked, biggest, guy walking around with no shirt on. Never done that. It was never important to me. But what was important to me was to create that shell of muscle around me so that people wouldn't pick on me, so people wouldn't come up and want to mess with me. And right, that led to anabolic steroid use and all types of different things, and really pushing the boundaries on what that could mean. So I graduated high school. I'm 6'2". I had to be 6'1" or 6'2" back then. And at best, I was 170 pounds, soaking wet with sweatpants on. Like, I was a very lean guy back then, small, skinny. And in my competitive bodybuilding days, I would compete on stage, same height, less than 3% body fat at 265 pounds, right? I would get up to 305 in the off season, still being able to see abs and, like, not ripped, but I occupied a lot of space.
Right.
Will be the best way to say it. But really, in working through things from this time we're about to discuss, just realizing the stories that I had created for myself in my head about why I was actually doing these things. Why was I'm not for or against anabolics, right? Everybody walks their own path. But why was I essentially poisoning my body? Why am I taking growth hormone and insulin and IGF-1? And why is it taking me an hour to inject myself with various things throughout the course of a day? Like, what is that actually doing? What am I trying to prove, and who am I trying to prove it to? Like, what do I have left to prove to myself? And is this going to actually pull it off? And so the physical fitness was part of it. And then what I really started to notice, Ryan, in the competitive landscape is I'm just going to treat you guys like friends. I don't lose. If I dedicate my mind to something, I will work to the point that I outwork or outlast the person I'm competing with, which inherently means I win. And so it's not even that I'm better. It's not even that I'm more tenacious. I'm just not going to stop. Like, I'm like the ravenous pit bull maybe that just latches onto your leg and just will not let go. And so when I look at those things, of those challenges and the vulnerability, like in the car world of, you're not going to do this, I knew I was capable of what this man was saying I wasn't capable of. And I was just going to go hone my skill and get extra knowledge and extra ability, and then come back and be able to prove to myself, and probably to that individual, that I could do it. So it's that challenge base, that necessity. Especially in high school, I wasn't a star athlete, right? I was okay, but I wasn't great. I wasn't, I was offered maybe a D2 scholarship somewhere for football, but maybe nickels on the dollar. And so it's like, all right, there's this whole other level I can play in, that my mind and my drive and tenacity allows me to play at an elite level, more so than anything else. And I'm in control of that. I'm in control of how I fuel my body. I'm in control of the things that I do to increase my neural capacity. I'm in control of the way I show up every day. That's not external facing. That's now internal facing, which provides me a sense of comfort because of, I'll say, personal control versus external control.
Sure. Well, no, I think it's really interesting. One thing you said that really stood out to me is this idea of using vulnerability as a tool. Like, it's actually an empowerment. I think a lot of us look at it as vulnerability as being an impediment rather than something that you could actually thrive from or be stronger because of. And, just like you said, I think, people could take it or could handle that situation in one of two ways, right? One is work harder and longer, like what you're describing. The other is go home, sit on the couch and sulk, right? I mean, there's both of those options. And so I think that it's really interesting combination of things, this insecurity on top of sort of this ultra competitiveness, right? Like I'm insecure, but I could still kick your ass. It's like, but this is how I'm going to prove it to myself, right? So I think that's really interesting.
I actually really, I can't tell you how many times someone has said something to me that's, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I've done exactly what you do, is just work into the point of like almost obsession, just to prove them wrong. Cause I'm bullheaded in a similar way. When it comes to someone says I can't do something, I'll do whatever it takes to prove you wrong, just because I know I can do whatever I want.
I've known Mike long enough to vouch for that.
Yeah. So we were talking about your first kind of foray of going off and having a failure, and having $2,000 in the bank. What did you do at that point where you were like, okay, how am I going to take this $2,000? How am I going to pay rent? And what I'm going to do next? Did you go and just find a 9 to 5 just to get by, or did you just roll the dice, put all $2,000 in, and say, let's go for broke? So,
Man, that would be such a better story if I did
yeah.
the latter instead of the former, but I definitely did the former, right? I looked at it that I was just fed up with the internet. I was fed up with kind of trying to make gobs of money too quickly, and sat down with my girlfriend at that point and said, hey, here's the facts of the life that the reality that I presented is different than the facts that I'm going to share. And we can talk about whatever that means, but here's my bank account balance. Here's the current situation. What do you want to do with it? Do we need to part ways, or can we figure this out together? She said, well, I went through a divorce.
I love that. I love that you just laid it on the line and said, this is what it is. You decide, instead of trying to play the lifestyle of, yeah, I'm rich. Yeah, I have this. Yeah, because at one point you didn't try to hide the fact that you were struggling. And I think when it comes to a significant other or family members, you can't pull the wool over their eyes. You have to throw it out there, show them exactly what's going on, and let them decide, and let them work with you on that. So, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're great. And I want to make sure that I don't get too many accolades where they're not completely due. I tried to pull the wool over her eyes for a while, right? And I realized that at some point when my back was against the wall, I'm like, this is stupid. I can't run from the facts anymore. And that's when I sat down, because when we met each other, I had multiple cars and things, right? And I'm slowly selling them off to pay bills and keep the business running. And she's, of course, asking, is everything all right? I'm like, yeah, everything's great, right? I'm just downsizing. I don't need 3 cars. I'm only one guy, just need one car. When it's really in the back of my mind, like, holy mackerel, I'm just burning through cash trying to keep this business afloat. And so we sit down, we level set, and she said, look, we've got some money saved up. She's working at that point. She's like, we're going to be all right. We'll get through this. But what's your plan? I don't really know what my plan is at this moment. I'd love to say I've got some, wicked game plan that I'm going to pull out and, hit the grand slam home run on the bottom of the 9th with the bases loaded and 2 out. But I don't know what that is right now. And as luck, or again, divinity would have it, her brother was getting married, and I'm still a larger stature guy, and I needed a suit. And I needed a suit. So I found a custom clothier in Columbus, Ohio, to make me a suit. And I'm having a conversation with this guy, and I said, look, my budget's $600 at the most, and it's going to be a stretch. Can you do anything for me? He goes, I can. And he was kind of apprehensive. I said, look, if you'll teach me how to do what you're about to do for me, I'll go out and sell for you, and I'll make sure it's worth it that you sold me one suit at $600. It's like, excuse me? I said, I can level set with you. I'm broke now. I've been successful before. I don't have any money now. I need to get my game together, and I'm tired of the internet world. I can do what I laughingly refer to as hand-to-hand combat. If you can teach me this craft, I can go sell to people. Okay, I'll teach it to you. So he measured me up for a suit, and then kind of taught me enough about fabric and measuring, gave me a couple books of fabric, and said, go get them. Okay. So I take to social media. I take to the streets, I'll call it, of Columbus, knocking on doors. I take to past people that have been in my life, just message them, let them know what I'm up to. And all of a sudden I have clients in New York City. I have clients in Salt Lake City. I have clients in Chicago, and clients in Southern Kentucky, where I had, my girlfriend, now wife, and I agreed that the budget for me to get a car was $1,500. right? That was what we were collectively okay spending. So I found a 1997 Cadillac sedan DeVille with a bench seat across the front. It was tan with tan interior, really the most quintessential, I'll say, silver hair type of car, right? It was an elderly person's car. Literally, the reason I was able to buy it is because an elderly woman had passed away and her kids just wanted rid of the car, like dead serious. Thing burnt oil, right? And from a car person that had a good fleet of cars, this is a very humbling experience for me. But have this car, and I would wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, drive to New York City to measure people, show them fabric, and didn't have money for a hotel room. So I would drive back as far as I could before I would fall asleep, pull over into a gas station, sleep until I would wake up, and then drive the rest of the way home. And the cycle that we had was I would hand deliver every suit as well. I would never ship something back. So every 45 days, I'm driving back and forth to each one of those 3 cities. So I ended up putting about 80,000 miles on this car in the first year, but pretty rapidly start producing at somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 a month in sales. And so I'm digging myself out of this hole, but refuse to eat at nice restaurants, refuse to sleep in hotels. Like, this is just my mobile house and an office, right? So of course, Salt Lake City, I have to fly to. I'm not driving from Columbus, Ohio to Salt Lake City. I want to make sure I'm saying that as well. That'd be a heck of a drive.
Yeah, that'd be a long one.
It would be. But start to create this reality over the next 12 or 18 months, where all that time in the car, I'm listening to books. Literally, I had to go out and find books on tape. This car did not have a CD player. So I find some old Tony Robbins books on tapes. I find some Jim Rohn stuff on tapes. And I refuse to listen to anything else other than that the entire time. So I'm either making sales calls or listening to a level of personal development, which I had never done before, right? It just wasn't something that was important to me. It was reading was something that other people did. And why would I listen to self-help people? And I'm finding all these things are just really embedding in my unconscious or subconscious mind. I don't realize that I'm, downloading all this information, starting to realize, right? It's a lot of life is just how you look at it, right? Do I want to be an optimist or a pessimist in some level? And so dig myself out of a hole, stack up a little bit of cash, and reach out to my old developers from the hosting company and say, hey, look, if I had an app, I could sell more clothing because people could enter their details in the app. If I already had their measurements, they could just pick out the wool and some of the designs. Could I pay you to help me do this? Here's kind of the situation of my life. So I spent 15 grand on developing this app, where it eventually got to the point where I could take pictures of the human body and had already entered in the measurements, right? You take 36 measurements for a custom suit, and it would cross-reference the data points and say the percentage of success in making the suit, right? Was it going to fit or was it not going to fit? And it was outside the standard tolerances that you'd have to remeasure, just a way to reduce errors. And so I show this to so I'm still working for somebody else at this point. I show this to him. I'm like, look what I built. I think we can use it as a company. He said, we will absolutely never use something like that. Why would we need that? Everything works fine right now. I said, look, I don't want anything for it. It's just, I've been using this and it saved me, quite a few remakes of just mismeasuring things. We don't need anything like that. Oh, okay. I guess I'm mistaken. And so I reach out to, at that point, right, that haberdashery world is pretty small at some point. So reach out to a wool manufacturer, another Ryan, a guy named Ryan Taylor, who owns Huddersfield Textiles in Huddersfield, England, and say, I've got this app. Some things are going on right now. What do you think about using the app and helping that grow your business? And I'm going to step out on my own and I want to exclusively represent your brand. He goes, oh, this is genius. Let's absolutely do that. I'll send you over a contract. Let's make this official. Okay, so I end up, kind of swapping equity. Here's the app, and I'll take a little tiny sliver of what you have going on over there, and step out on my own, and grow a sales force of 5 sales reps, and go down that route. But then wake up early in 2016 and realize I'm never home. I'm missing what it is that I'm actually doing all this for. I'm on the road 6 days a week. I'm never spending nights in my own bed. I'm not around who's now my fiance and our daughter. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. This just doesn't make sense to me. So I owner finance it to my head of sales. Say, I'm just out. Like, here, take all my customers, take all the pieces and parts, do anything you want with the business. I'm done. And so step into, at that moment in early 2016, direct to consumer CBD. I'm a glutton for punishment. I jumped back into the internet marketing space. I see that CBD, some of the trends online are showing it's an emerging thing. It's really a lot different than it is now, right? 6 years ago, CBD was still one of those fray products. It was something my parents and friends thought I was a drug dealer. I mean, they thought I was selling pot essentially, and selling these CBD tinctures and gummies. And I grew this little company, right, from 16 to December of 2018, and sold it off to a private equity group out of Pittsburgh. Now, again, these aren't huge exponential exits. It was a couple $1 million. By the time we pay off debt, you're walking away with enough cash to live for a year if you needed to. But really, just this little season of life from, I guess it would have been 14 to about 18, was just this rebuilding and recalibration phase of just getting my mind right, getting level set again. And really at that point, coming across an individual, Garrett J. White, owned something called Wake Up Warrior. And it was a lot of individuals I knew at that point had went through his program, some men's training. And they were very, very successful in my eyes. Like, man, what is going on in this training that all these people that I view to be very, very successful have all went through this training? Still don't have the money to invest in what the training was, but bought what he referred to as the Black Book back then, limited production book. Won't bore with all the details, but really what it ended up doing was holding me accountable and giving me a framework to live life by. And I didn't realize at that point how much I was now in search of that. Like, I needed the consistency and the accountability. And then I needed a tribe to run with, as that eventually pushed into, just an overall fascination with psychology and studying the work by a guy named Ken Wilber, something called spiral dynamics. Understanding that what I was going through was actually completely normal. That in the potential construct of spiral dynamics, there's groupings and levels that we, transcend, go through as individuals, but also as groups, right? Societies, cities, states, countries. And part of the natural evolution, it's not that a higher level is better than a lower level, they're just different. And part of it is eventually we seek tribalism. We seek a group of people with like-minded, interest to run with, and then to hold each other accountable. And that once you've experienced that, most of us eventually want to lead a tribe. We want to emerge and start to, impact other people's lives. We see what it's done for us and we want to go help other people do that. And this continues on and on and on throughout life, potentially. And so I'm studying this at the same time that I'm going through Wake Up Warrior, and I'm seeing the benefit in my life of, there's 8 simple things that each are worth a half point. So Garrett had gamified the process of life. You meditate every day. You journal about what you meditate, you drink your green smoothie, you sweat, you send a note of appreciation to your significant other, you send a note of appreciation to a stranger, you read something that's business-based, and then you share what you learned with other people. And if you do each one of those, you get a half point, and he referred to it as a core 4. And there was this saying that he had created or shared that you hit your core 4 before you hit the door, so you're ready to go to war. Because when you leave your domicile, when you leave your house, typically the world's coming at you pretty quick. People need things in the business world. There's traffic, there's stoplights, there's things that go on. And so by simply waking up early enough to do those 8 things before I left the house, and then being held accountable by a group of other men that are doing the same thing at the same time, and certainly having that competitive nature of, I don't want to come in last. I don't want to be the last one to get that done every day. I don't want to be the one that skipped it one day. It started to fortify this belief in myself, where, again, tapping back into that psychology, you look at somewhere between 27 and 65 days, or what the average human being needs to build an actual habit that they deem to be their own versus something they're trying to do for somebody else. So doing this for 90 days just completely created as it's not something I'm doing that somebody else is. It's just how I live my life. And it became this great leverage point for me in seeing how much more personal power or production that I was capable of, and seeing, gosh, okay, I've got this thing and I've got this group of people to run with. I'm now engaged. Like, life is pretty good. I've sold a couple businesses, kind of digging myself back out of the hole. And you tap back into the vulnerability side of things, Ryan, that, like, okay, I know I want to do something greater, but man, I've made a bunch of bonehead decisions in my life. I got a bunch of stuff that if I try to step in front of the world, try to be in front of the camera, man, it's going to come at me aggressively. I say, you know what? I'm going to get myself a little Rodecaster microphone, a USB mic that plugs into my old MacBook. I'm going to pull up GarageBand. I'm going to hit record. I'm just going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes a day on the stuff that you're not supposed to talk about. I'm going to talk about infidelity. I'm going to talk about steroid use. I'm going to talk about failed businesses. I'm going to talk about lying and cheating and all the things all about me. And the sole reason I did that is I knew inside I wanted to do something greater, and I didn't want somebody else to be able to poke at me about a story that they thought was salacious that I could have just said up front. So the podcast was literally like, I'm just going to share the truth. Like, you know what, I'm going to do it 7 days a week because I got a lot of stuff I got to get rid of. Then it became this challenge to myself. Could I actually do a 7-day-a-week podcast? And how long could I keep it up for? That eventually led in 2018. Then a little gamification of how iTunes worked back then. I ended up getting about 4.5 million downloads on that podcast and was the 17th most downloaded new podcast on all of iTunes. iTunes sends me this award and all this crazy stuff goes on. Like, man, there's a lot of people that find value in just sharing the truth. It wasn't lead gen for something. It wasn't leading to something. It was literally me just being, I called it authentically vulnerable. It's, guys, this isn't leading to something. This is me being cathartic and just getting this stuff out and sharing. And about 130 or so episodes in, I say, hey, you know, if anything I've shared is of any value to you whatsoever, here's my personal email address. I'd love to help you out, give you resources, give you, you know, X, Y, and Z. And I wake up, you know, a day or two later, and I've got 1,400 plus emails in my email box of people just asking for things. I'm like, holy mackerel, I don't have any system built. I don't have any process built. I don't have a Salesforce built. I don't even know what to offer these people. But I've got 1,400 people now that have emailed saying, yeah, whatever you've been through, it could help me too. And that's where some of these pieces really started to click, Ryan, of like, man, if I'm just vulnerable and I'm just myself and I tell the truth, it resonates with people. I don't have to be anyone different than I am in this moment because it's divinely perfect. I'm exactly where I need to be right now in this moment in time. I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a multi-hundred millionaire. I'm just who I am in this moment. And it's okay to share from that place. I don't have to project to be something greater, which is interesting to me as I look at social media, like how compelled most people are to show the watches and the cars and the trips and seeking this external approval instead of realizing the gifts that we need, the approval is all internal. It's all an internal state.
Well, it's funny. I think you've sort of landed on something. And honestly, I mean, we could let this conversation go on forever and then have a whole nother one about just sort of tactical execution of some things, right? You know, and obviously, well, I would like to touch on some of that stuff before we get out of here. But one of the things that I think is so interesting about the story, I mean, in addition to the vulnerability thing, but it's like the amount of stuff that we have to do for ourselves or to improve ourselves, and then how it manifests in something else, right? So, I mean, you just made the point with social media, this idea that, you know, we're busy looking for sort of external validation when really all we're doing is probably just chasing internal validation, right? And we're trying to get it from somebody else. And I think that happens a lot in the business community. And I think you have a lot of young entrepreneurs, especially, who don't think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, or I'm not getting rich fast enough, or I'm not doing, you know, not living up to some expectations set by somebody else, or, you know, whatever it is. And so we spend a lot of our lives, I think, chasing down stuff like this. You know, I'm certainly guilty of it, where I sit and I run after whatever it is I think is the thing that will make you the most happy. Right. But it has very little to do with me and my happiness or what I'm looking forward to. But it actually has a lot more to do with me just trying to meet someone else's expectation. And even half the time, it's not even really their expectation. It's something we're putting on them. And so you see a lot of this stuff. And you know, as I'm hearing your journey or sort of this whole thing break down, you know, you can see that the sort of the insecurity or the vulnerability that was there, that existed as a kid, was something you had to overcome. And it sounds like you're still doing the work on, you know. So I think that is, you know, maybe useful for people who are listening to the show, right? Is that this idea that, you know, you don't have to have it figured out, you know, and I think that's okay. One of the other things you keep doing, or the way that you're framing our conversation basically, is this concept of seasons. And we've actually, I think we've had another guest on that talked about these seasons before, but I wonder if you talk just a little bit about that sort of mindset, right? Because I think, especially for entrepreneurs, and I don't know if this is your experience, in my age, I'm 42, and I'm having all these questions and doubts, you know, am I doing the right thing? Is it time to do something different? Should I shift? Should I keep, you know, stay the course? You know, all these different things. But this concept of seasons actually makes it really easy to take a life apart and then break it into sections. And then it becomes easier to just go, okay, well, of course I'll do this. This is the season of, you know, X. And then, you know, I don't know, maybe in 6 months, we'll have the season of Y. Like, it doesn't have to be, you know, it's not 4 seasons and you're out. It's like, and so I think that concept is really interesting. So from like a mindset perspective, I wondered if you just touch a moment on that seasons thing and how it works for you.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. So, right, I'm 38, so I'll say we're generationally the same. And I look at, my parents and their parents. It was pretty normal to find your first job, and you're going to work your 40 years at it, and you're eventually going to retire, and you're going to work up through the corporate ranks. And that's just kind of how it was supposed to be in theory. And I believe some of that hangover of the mindset of what is expected is still prevalent inside of a lot of us, where to me, the world has just shifted. And if I look at every decision I make as the decision that I'm going to have to be stuck with forever, that paralysis by analysis gets really real for me. And when I believe success leaves clues. So I take someone like Jeff Bezos, who has a concept of type 1 and type 2 decisions, where type 1 decision is simply something, imagine a one-way door that when you go through it, it's really, really challenging. You're gonna have to tear off the door to go back through it, right? That's one of those decisions that it's pretty difficult to come back from. But those are so few and far between that if you write down what are all the type 1 decisions in your life, like you as an entrepreneur, as you're listening to this, it's typically things like, okay, if I get divorced, it's pretty tough to come back from. Like, I guess I could go back and recourt my now ex-wife, but that'd be a challenge. That'd be something that'd be pretty difficult to overcome, right? There's some certain things inside of business that if you do them the wrong way, they're pretty difficult to overcome. But the majority of things are type 2 decisions, which, yes, they have impact, but that door is still swinging both ways. If you make the decision, you can typically go back pretty easily and remake the decision. And so it's like, okay, hold on. If I just make a list for myself, I'm a visual learner as well. So I literally write down, what are all my type 1 decisions, not only inside of business, but inside my personal life? Okay, so anything that's not a type 1 decision, then I kind of switch into more of an Elon Musk type of methodology, which is rapid decision making and quick iteration, where to me, every new input that we experience in life allows us to have different possibilities for output, meaning fail fast and fail forward. So how can I simply make the best decision in this moment if it's type 2 and realize that maybe it's the best decision possible? And maybe that best decision works really well for a period of time. I don't know what that period of time is going to be. I wish I had that crystal ball, but I don't know. I'm going to run this until the wheels fall off on whatever the decision is. But I have to be consciously aware that if I'm not consistently growing in thought process, in connections, in methodology, the rest of the world is still growing and trying to catch up. And there'll come a point that if I'm not willing to iterate and create a new version, I'm probably going to get passed up, which to me then inherently means there has to be, as I refer to it, just new seasons of possibility. And we're getting into more of a metaphysical based conversation. There's something that happens when you change environments and that new environmental input, where if you've noticed, right, even if it's a vacation, and it doesn't have to be an illustrious 5-star vacation, but what happens when you, right, being in Utah, what happens when you drive down to St. George and you stay in a hotel for a weekend in St. George? It's just, there's new sensory inputs. It typically creates these new neurosynapses that allow you to think more creatively for a period of time, where those new ideas come. And it's like, okay, if that's a possibility, just hypothetically a possibility for all of us, then why wouldn't we allow that to be something that we consider? Right? I was guilty for a very long time in saying, okay, I'm going to sell custom clothing forever. And I approached that business like I was going to do it forever. It wasn't short-term thinking. It wasn't seasonality. But when I got bored and I got burnt out and I realized what I was giving up, it took me a minute and a half to make the decision that I was done. And it wasn't this thing of fear. It was like, okay, this served me incredibly well for this, I'll make it up, 18 to 24 months. It did everything it was supposed to do for me. So instead of the shame, the guilt, the doubt, some of those negative emotions that are typically, attached to new decisions, like, is something wrong with me? This business is working. Why? I should just be able to fight through this. Well, what happens when that's a sign from whatever your deity is that you believe in? What if that's a sign from something greater of like, okay, it's time to pivot. It's time to grow. It's time to consider new possibilities. And I just wait for that message to come, if you will. And I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just a level of crazy that all of us have inside of us. Maybe there's nothing external. There is no deity. But it's still the fact of, man, if I just sit down and can get calm and can listen and allow myself the possibilities to unfold in front of me, it becomes pretty easy. Because I don't know about you guys, and I don't know about it as you're listening. There is no way I could have mapped out all the things that had to transpire for me to be sitting here in this office in front of you two right now. I don't care how great I would have tried to map it out and all the possibilities. There is no way I could have figured this out even 6 months ago. So why am I trying to figure out how the next 4 years have to look? Because it's not going to unfold the way I plan it to. Even if I sit and map it all out, I'm going to do this and then this and then this to the nth degree. The only thing I know for certain is it's going to end up different than I think it is.
That's
I just let it
hilarious
roll.
because Ryan has been known to say a quote that's very similar to what you just said. That it takes every footstep, everything that you do in your day to day that gets you to the point where you are today, right now, making the decisions that you're making right now. So whether or not it was a good decision or a bad decision that got you here, you're here. So deal with it and move on. I slaughtered your quote, Ryan. You're known for saying
That's
it,
okay. I
but
slaughtered it too because I don't really know where it comes from. But it's just for me. I used it initially to kind of fight off this insecurity or whatever I was feeling, which was basically manifesting almost like regret. Like I've taken a bunch of wrong steps. I'm doing the wrong things. I'm not, not progressing as quick as I could. All the things that I put on some, fictional entrepreneur as we have these conversations, but it's all my past drama. And but I use that phrase, like what Mike was saying, basically as a way of sort of negating any of that decision making in the past, right? I mean, we all do whatever we can do with what we have at any given moment, right? And so I'm going to act in a certain way or respond in a certain way based on where my brain is at today. And that's made up of a lifetime of experiences. And so this concept of a good choice or a bad choice, is almost irrelevant, right? Because ultimately you just end up where you end up. So maybe, I don't know, on the grand scorecard of life, if you really want to try and assess a value, down the road, you could say, yes, I won, or no, I didn't, maybe. But ultimately, I think the concept anyway is that it's okay to have uncertainty about things, and this idea that you're going to have certainty is maybe just not even.
yeah. I actually want to unpack a few things about the last thing you were talking about, and the ability to have that thought in your head of I'm going to sell clothes and suits until the day I die, and then realize that you're not enjoying it, you're not living it to your fullest, and being able to say, okay, this isn't what I want to do anymore. Let's move on to the next thing, and to have that self-awareness to know that you're not enjoying what you're doing, or you're dreading the slog of going into work. I don't know if that's what it was, but having that ability to say, hey, I don't enjoy this anymore. Let's move on. I want to prioritize and spend time with my wife, my fiance, my kids, family, whatever, and actually doing it. Most people, they have the revenue stream set up and they're doing good. They're not going to take that step back, realize that this is slowly killing me, and take that step and actually sell it off to your partner, and move on to something else. And just having that level of self-awareness um, is really important. I think people need to take steps back and look from an outside perspective and really analyze your thoughts about what you're doing. Anyone that's been listening to this podcast for quite a while, and we touched on this a little bit before the conversation that started. I've been down this road a few times with the landscaping business, with other things that I've done, and you get into it, you're really excited, really doing good, and you're making money, and then you realize this isn't what I wanted to do. This isn't where I wanted to end up. And having that ability to step back and just saying, hey, you know what? It was a good try. Life moves on, move on with it. That I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of people struggle with that, and will continue to do the same slog over and over and over again for 10 years, and before they know it, they're 80, and that's all they've done their whole life. So
To that end,
yeah.
I would just add too, I mean, Mike, to I guess sort of reinforce what we've been talking about here is, yes, I guess the literal season of the landscaping business was short-lived, but you learned about licensing and bonding and hiring and firing and contracts and pricing. And there's a laundry list of stuff you learned that, now whatever your next step is, all those things will be applicable to whatever you're doing. So I think this idea, or just to kind of reinforce what we were talking about, this idea that, no good and bad decisions, everything's, basically adding to the pile. It was for sure a great choice because now you have all these skills or all these things, in your arrows in your quiver that, work for whatever's next.
Yeah. One other thing, real quick, but before we get back into the real conversation here, you mentioned building your app for the suits, to sell the suits, and having that foresight to realize there's a better solution. I can create a process that will do this all for me, and have this tool, and it'll make my life easier. And then going out and paying with your own money to develop this tool to succeed, and then when they didn't want to take it on, and stepping out and saying, hey, you know what, I've got this, I want to go down this other branch and see if I can get this to work. A lot of people would have just thrown the app away. A lot of people would have been, like, well, they didn't want it. It was a cool idea. No big deal. I'll keep doing my thing. But to have the nerve to say, you know what? He didn't want it. I still want to pursue this, and I want to go down that road. That takes a lot as well. So kudos to you for following your dreams, doing your thing.
Thanks. I'd love to share two things from what you just made mention of. I think that ultimately necessity is always the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And the part that we're skipping over is, as I was having remakes on suits that would come in and wouldn't fit someone, not only was it making my customer relationships not as strong with me, but it was actually coming out of my own pocket to remake the suits. So I'm sitting there saying, there's got to be a better way to do this. I got to be able to find someone to help use a level of tech. And when I started investing in it, I'm like, all right, if I just sell X number of suits and my remake percentage is 5%, if I can shave that down to 0.5% or 0, it's going to take me this number of suits to repay back the app. It was completely, for me, it was selfish as could be. And I was really proud of it as my quality of delivery started getting better and better. That's what had me bring it to the owner. And when he said no, I'm like, well, I can still keep it because I'm still going to use it because it's working for me. I'm okay if you don't see the value in it. But I'm like, this is really foolish because I know it works. I just have to find someone that's got more inputs. And when you sell wool, it's like, well, of course, he's selling wool to 100 and 300, 1,000 other custom clothiers across the globe. Of course, he would want something to make it better and better for him, because the more suits that come in that are great means the more wool that he'll sell, because more people will keep wanting more clothes from the clothiers. And so it was just a necessity play. Ultimately, I'd love to say it was at some sort of internal guidance and fortitude. It was just like, it's just math at some point.
Yeah.
Then,
So, Ryan, do you remember back when I was selling auto glass back in the day in Phoenix? So I did that door to door. I sold auto glass as a short time period thing to make some money, and they didn't give us business cards. They didn't give us any like material to leave for, like, if you go and knock on it, you find a car with a broken windshield. It's obvious they need it repaired, and you go knock on their door, no one's home. You can't sell if no one's home. So since Ryan was a graphic designer, I had him make door hangers for me. And I was the only person on the sales crew that had door hangers that people could call back. I offered a discount, like, here, receive X, whatever the offer was, but none of my other coworkers had this. And I was seeing the benefits of having physical materials to actually leave out there. And that's a tangible example of something similar to exactly what you just did. So sorry to interrupt again.
no, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love the tangible example. And then it's that new inputs would create a new reality. So if I could go back in time to the custom clothing company or to the CBD business, I actually wouldn't have sold either one of them. I would have
Yeah.
documented the processes and procedures, and I would have found an implementer to run the business. Even if I just took 10% off the top of every transaction, every other dollar stayed, I could have built annuities from all the hard work that I put into that moment. And it's this fascinating thing that exists when I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even think that was a possibility of just creating a systemization and standard operating procedures and a level of documentation and financial oversight to allow it to be that I could have had 3, 4, 5 businesses additional to have what I have now, even if they're all just providing, pick whatever number, $20,000 to me a year. Well, ultimately, that's okay. That's a good thing to have set up. And so again, it's to go back to really pulling a lot of the pieces of our conversation together, right? That's a new season of inputs that I've received that show me what else is possible by being around people that think that way, being able to say, okay, I'm not beating myself up for what I didn't know. I don't know if I'd go back and really change it or not, but being vulnerable enough to share right now, like, I can't wait to meet the 4-year ahead version of myself, because he's going to think that what I'm doing right now is probably a little foolish, right? I hope I'm still gaining leverage and momentum on where I'm at now as an individual, and being vulnerable enough to share it. Like, it's okay to be where you're at right now and not to beat yourself up for the decisions you did or didn't make. And really, Ryan, we talk about those decisions. And on my side, I really focus on eradicating good and bad, right? Those are constructs that we've created as human beings that don't really, I'll say in most situations, exist. A decision to me is just a decision. When I make a decision, it leads to the possibility of new decisions because there's something else happening. And if I look at things that way, then it's like, well, just make a decision, just make it and be open to what comes next. And it's just been such a refreshing way for me to live, to not feel that weight on my shoulders as an entrepreneur, as a business owner of, man, if I make the wrong decision, what's going to happen here? If I make a bad decision, it's going to affect all these people. Well, no, I just have to be willing to be humble enough to say, boy, that decision didn't lead to the outcome I hoped. Let me make another decision really quickly and not be too prideful to keep trying to prove myself to be right when nobody ultimately cares who's right and who's wrong. They just care that the outcome is better than it was before.
Well, Ryan, I hate to do this because we're getting to the end of our time together. And I feel like what we've got right now is a conversation that's like, I don't know, a quarter of the way through. And so, I mean, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking the time and, you know, going down sort of this mindset journey, really. I mean, you know, I know that you run a consulting practice at this point, and I think it's a nice deep dive into your sort of, you know, where you are mentally and how you feel, you know, think about things and stuff. So I think it's really valuable for people who might want to work with you as a consultant. We did make a bunch of promises at the top about mergers and acquisitions and team building and all these things. And I'd love to do it again sometime if you would be open to maybe doing a part 2 down the road. This conversation has been, you know, eye-opening. I mean, I still have half a dozen things here that I would love to unpack with you. So maybe if it makes sense for you, maybe we'll have you back on and we'll do a more like a business focused conversation and use this one sort of as the foundational conversation or the footing for, you know, what could be a great shift in mindset for a young entrepreneur.
I'd be truly honored, Ryan, and hopefully we could line it up that we could do it even in person, right? I'm
There we go.
back and forth to Salt Lake City often. That'd be incredible for me.
I
Yeah.
love it. We'll do that.
Awesome.
So cool. So Mike, unless you've got anything else.
No, I was gonna say I'm actually gonna be back in that neck of the woods as well, so we could do it
Well,
all
yeah,
together.
we'll book a conference room or a coffee
Yeah.
shop or something. We'll go do it. We'll do an in person. We haven't done one for a while, but really since COVID. We used to have a studio here in Salt Lake City, and you know, with the pandemic and everything, we closed it, and so we haven't done in person for some time. So that'd be fun. So I guess then, before we get out of here for this, you know, part 1 conversation, do you want to give people some heads up where they can track you down online, engage with your content, you know, find you online or engage in a conversation or anything?
Absolutely, Ryan. Thank you. I tend to be not so creative. So on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, literally type in my name, RyanNiddel. And that's my handle on every platform. That's also my domain. It's just RyanNiddel.com. Don't have much to sell on there, just complimentary information. If you want to opt into my email list, I don't pitch anything. It's just a couple times a week, I drop a little information to help you progress your business or your life forward. If it speaks to you over a period of time, we could have a further conversation.
Cool.
Nice.
Love it. Well, that I think works great. And like I say, I mean, I guess I'm equal parts, you know, upset we didn't get through everything, but thrilled to death that we took the time to talk about this stuff. Because, you know, with most CEOs and most startup people, you know, the conversation tends to become very tactical. You know, we're talking about the thing you can do to prepare for an exit, for example, or, you know, you should do this to, you know, scale your business, or you should, you know, whatever. Right. And so this stuff, these like sort of deeper, more ethereal conversations, I think are really valuable for people, because I think we all feel the same, but I think there's a lot of us putting up masks and things like that to kind of pretend that we don't. And so I think it's good, you know, for the 3 of us to sit here and talk about it and just sort of lay it out on the table and say, you know what, we're all just like you guys. Because I think that for a listening audience who are largely CEOs and entrepreneurs and stuff like that, there's plenty of fake makeup folks out there. So I think the sooner you can come to grips with yourself, the better off you'll be.
Completely agree.
All right.
So cool. So I guess thanks so much for doing this, and I guess we'll look forward to doing it again sometime. So thanks to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week, and we'll see you guys next time.